So in our last exercise, we created a brand new remote repository, this GitHub Basics repository that I'm currently looking at. And currently it is empty. We didn't initialize anything other than a license when we created it, and we haven't uploaded any files to it, so it's still empty. Now, if for whatever reason you've navigated away from this repo and you need to come back to it, it's very easy to find. Let's say, for example, I'm on the GitHub home screen. If I go to My Account, click on the Repositories tab, it's very easy for me to click on GitHub Basics and come right back to the screen. Okay, so we're not seeing any files listed yet, and that's because, of course, we don't have any. You'll notice that this little link right down here that says we recommend every repository include a README license and a gitignore. Now, we did a license when we initialized the repo, but we told it not to do a README or a gitignore. We're going to talk about gitignore in the next exercise. So in this exercise, I want to focus on the value of having a README file for your repos. So if you've ever gone to a GitHub repo and you scroll down past the listing of all the files, you get a little bit of descriptive text about what that repo is. Some of them are very, very brief, maybe one sentence. Others are really long and read almost like a frequently asked question. Well, all of those are there because of a README file. So I'm going to go ahead and click right here on this link to create a new one. And that takes me to the text editor that's built into GitHub. We'll be using this a little bit later on when we talk about editing existing files, but you can also use it to create files. Now, the first thing that it does is it names the file readme.md. And unless there's a very good reason for you to change that, just leave that alone. So the MD stands for Markdown. And Markdown is a specific type of text file that includes some easy-to-use syntax helpers for formatting your text. So instead of using a WYSIWYG editor, for example, you could just write it in Markdown. Now, it'll accept everyday regular text file too. So if you already have a README file that you want to use and it's in a text format, you don't have to convert it to Markdown, although you certainly could. You could just upload it, and as long as it's in the root directory of the project, it'll be used the way that the README file is intended to be used. Okay, so I've loaded up a couple of tabs up here in anticipation of talking to you guys about Markdown. Learning Markdown is pretty easy to do, and GitHub has some articles on it that will help you. If I click on the GitHub help, for example, so if you go to GitHub help and scroll down, there's a little section right here on writing on GitHub, and they have the basics of Markdown, and then they have the specifics of the GitHub flavor of Markdown, because GitHub has their own version of Markdown that they use. So if you already know Markdown, it's really easy to learn the things that GitHub has added. If you've never used it before, you can sort of read through both of these to get a feeling for how to do things. For example, if you want text to be displayed in an H1 tag, you simply use a single hash in front of the sentence. If you want an H2, use 2 hashes, so forth and so on. So pretty simple to do, right? All right, so I'm going to modify our README file. It's picking this up from the name and the description that we gave the repo, which is nice. I'm just going to change the title to GitHub Basics to make that a little bit more descriptive. And then down below this, let's practice using some Markdown. One of the things Markdown can do for us is create links. If I just pasted in a link to a website, for example, it would go ahead and convert that to an actual link when we publish this. But you can actually get a little bit fancier with it. If I use brackets notation, I can actually do an inline link very simply. So I'm going to open up a bracket. This is the square brackets, not the angles, but the square bracket. And I'm going to type in, I'm learning this on lynda.com. Exclamation point, close my bracket. Now, without doing a space, I'm going to open up a parentheses, and now I'm going to pass in the link that I want to use for this, which in this case is lynda.com. So this is, just sort of scratching the surface of what we can do with README files inside of GitHub. And if you read through the articles on using Markdown, you're going to be pleasantly surprised at how much control you have over what your README file looks like. Now, when we're finished with this, we don't just save it because this is a repo. We're actually going to make a commit. So just like making a commit earlier, we have to pass a message in, and you could do a summary and an optional extended description if you want. You can see that it goes ahead and self-populates this with create a README file, which is fine. And if you wanted to add another description, you could come in and say something like practicing my Markdown skills. This time, I'm going to use an S. All right, and as soon as I'm finished with that, I'm going to go ahead and commit it. It'll save the file, and it will commit it as part of our repo. Now, the view of our repository is totally different now, because instead of seeing that sort of starting page where it tells us how to link to this remote repository, it now displays the repository. The only file we have in there is our new README file that we just created, And right down here, we can see the value of having that README file. It says GitHub Basics, and then, of course, we have our descriptive text. And let's check and see if our link works. If I click on that, it takes me right to lynda.com. So yes, that's working out great. And there's our finished README file. Now, again, you can create these README files on your own in any text editor that you want, or you can create them directly right here on the GitHub site. Honestly, either way is about as simple, so it really boils down to your own personal preference.